Welcome to Meliora's channel, your go-to place for C# and data analysis tutorials, products hands-on demos, and insider secrets to keep you at the cutting edge of innovation. Our goal is to break down complex tech topics to a level that you will easily understand to supercharge your skills. Without further ado, let's jump right in.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this Python for data science course. In the last video, we talked about Python data structures. We talked about the list, the set, dictionary, and the tuple. In this video, we're going to talk about Pythonloops, functions, and inputs. So let's get started. Loops in Python are used to execute a block of code multiple times. So sometimes you might not want to repeat what you have written. You can just decide to put it in a loop, in the loop like runs it for a period of time. Let's say, let me give you an example. Let me say I want to print the number 1 to 5 individually. Without the loop, I will have to do print 1, print 2, so technically, this works. But if you observe, you see that I sort of repeated some things, especially the print, and it just makes the code cumbersome. Pythonloops helps us to run a block of code, as many times as we want. That's what Pythonloops is all about. So Python have two types of loops. We have the for loop and we have the while loop. The for loop iterates over a sequence or an iterator, and then the while loop repeats as long as a condition is satisfied. So let's give an example. Let me say I want to print these numbers again, or using the loop. I can use the for loop and I can use the while loop. Using the for loop, I'll write something like this. So this does the same as the previous cell, but just in a shorter way. What the range function does is, the range function takes a value and then returns an iterator or a list of values from 0 to the value that has been taken. So if I'm to run this, to do the same thing, okay, but the downside is it is 0 index, meaning that it will start counting from 0. So if I'm to make it count from 1, I can just come here and add 1, and then it's literally the same thing. So the format of a for loop is the for keyword, for, then the key you want to identify the things coming out from the sequence, or call it anything key, in then the sequence or iterator. We can use range, say 5, then the colon. You can now write the function here, print key. Now, another method of doing what we did above here is by putting the numbers in a list. Let's say num list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can now remove this and then replace it with num list. So if we run this, it goes through the items in the list and then print it out. It iterates over a sequence. That's what it does. That's what the for loop does. So let's take another example. Let's say we have a list of names, or a list of fruits. You can put here mango, orange, pineapple, and an apple. We can iterate through the items in this list and print it out. So let's iterate for key in fruits. Print key. And as you can see, it iterates it and then passes it through as a function. Now let's go to the while loop. The while loop syntax is a lot different than the for loop. The while loop sets a condition, and as far as the condition is satisfied, the while loop still continues. Let's just say we want to do the same thing we did here. The same thing we did here with this for loop. It will be quite different. So we have to define a variable first to store the starting number. We can now, and the syntax for the while loop is while the conditional then the rest of the code goes here. That's the format. And in this case, we want to count down, we want to count up from 1 to 5. So the condition I have here has to be, count less than 6, since 5 is inclusive. We want to count up to 5, but we don't want to count 6. Can now say print count, then count increment. So this is a short form of saying count is equal to count plus 1. That's a short form of saying it. So what it does is, while the condition is satisfied, it increments and keeps printing count until the condition becomes false. So if we run this, exactly the same thing. But in this case, it does not iterate from a sequence. It works with conditionals. Now, sometimes you might not be aware of your code, especially when you're running loops. And what you're running can lead to something called an infinite loop. And it is very bad, especially for the processing time and the amount of storage it's going to consume while it is running. So an infinite loop is a loop that runs continuously without any unforeseeable future where it's going to end, or without end. It's not going to end. Let's write an infinite loop. While true, print. This is an infinite loop. So if we are to run this, it keeps running until forever. As you can see, it's still running without any end in sight, and it keeps running. It's advisable to look at your code before you execute it to ensure that this type of problem does not exist. And as you can see, this is not going to stop unless I stop it myself, which I've done. This sort of error occurs, especially when you executing is going to consume computer memories, computer storage, and it's going to consume processing time, and those things used to affect the program as the program is going. So it's best to avoid infinite loops. Now, sometimes you would want to check some conditions within the loop. There are some keywords in Python that we can use to check for conditions within the loop. We call those keywords control statements. They used to break out of a loop whenever a condition is satisfied, instead of you going through the whole thing. And They are also used to skip some conditions. Let me remove this. Then run on. Okay. So examples of the keywords include break, continue, and else. So we're going to use break. Let's take the fruit, for example. I don't want to traverse through a sequence and find out whether the sequence matches something you're looking for. That's when break comes into play. You break out of the loop when the sequence matches something you're looking for. Let's take the fruits, this fruit example. Let's take this fruit example. So let's say, let's close this. Let's say if key is equals to pineapple, print key and break. So in this scenario, it's checking whether the key is equals to pineapple, and if it is equal to pineapple, it breaks out. Let me just uncomment this so that you can see that it breaks out. So once you run it, it runs through all of them. Let me comment this too so you can see. It runs through everything, and when you reach pineapple, it breaks out and the loop ends. So that's what break is for. Break is for you to break out of a loop. The next keyword we're going to talk about is continue. Continue is used to skip the current iteration and continue to the next one. So let's say, let me bring this down here. Let's say we would like to break, we would like to skip pineapple. We want to print everything except pineapple. We can use continue. We use continue. So continue will skip every code under it and then goes to the next iteration. So if we run this, as you can see, it has already skipped pineapple and went to apple. It is used basically to just skip certain thing. Now I want to use a certain illustration. Let me print out all the even numbers from 1 to 10, and I'll use continue. So let's say for I in range 1 to 10, 11, if I modulus 2 equals to 0, not equals to 0, continue. If not, print I. So this loop will iterate from 1 to 11 exclusive and print out only even numbers. So if you run it, you see 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, which are the actual even numbers. So this scenario, continue was used to skip all numbers and print out even numbers. And then the last one is else. Else executes when a loop is completely normal, if the loop goes on without a break. Let me use this example and run it here. I remove this replace it with break. And then be like else print displayed. So if I'm to run this, the else will not run because a pineapple exists in the sequence and pineapple breaks it out. So if I'm to run it, it will only run those things. But if I'm to remove this section of the code and run this, since there was absence of break in the sequence in the loop, it will print the else part. So that concludes it with loops. We are now going to talk about Python functions. Now, sometimes some code might be pretty usable at some point in your program, and you won't want to duplicate them, or you want to follow the DIY rule, don't repeat yourself rule. Your next course of action is to define that set of code as a function. So technically, a function can be called a building block in Python. It allows us to group usable code into a single unit. Now, that's the advantage of a function. Instead of writing the same code multiple times, we can just define a function that covers the whole thing, and we can call it whenever we need. There are some built-in functions we have used throughout this course. Example, the print function. The print is a function that we use to display the output, and it's a built-in function. So since it's a function, it can take in multiple arguments and it can be used at different points. So it's like a block of code that was grouped, which we can now move around in the application and use it at different points. To create a Python function, the syntax is def, which is defining the Python function. Then function name, parentheses. You might want to add argument here. Argument means things that will be useful in the function that the function would like to use to process. Then this should now be the function body. The function body is where the code stays, is where the code you want to be portable stays. So we're going to define a Python function. So let's say we want to run something like this. Print only even numbers. So instead of us writing this every time, we can define a function called print only even numbers. And we can, don't forget that Python works with indentation. If you don't indent your code after when you're writing a program, it will not be functional. As you can see, I've indented it for this tree. So like this, now we have defined a function. We have defined a function. So if we run it, there will be no output. But to verify that the function exists, we can call the function with the function name print only even numbers. When we call it, it executes the block of code in the function. Now this function, we can now use it anywhere without having to write multiple things, since it's now grouped into a useful block of code. Now the second thing I want to talk about functions is about the arguments and parameters. Remember when I defined the syntax of a function, I put in something as argument. So arguments can be used to alter the result of a function. and most times they are required. So let's define an argument. Let's say we want to create a function that can print only even numbers within 1 and a number x, whereby a number x can be any number that is given. In this function, this function prints even numbers from 1 to 11. But with an argument, we can alter that function to print from 1 to x. And x is going to be the variable, the function parameter or argument. So let's define this function again. So we're going to copy this and then paste it. We can now add a argument. Let's call the argument x. There could be very good naming conventions outside, but for simplicity, let's play x. Then we'll now have to substitute x inside the range function. Then we can put it x here and then change the name of the function. Even numbers to x. So when you call this function, you have to put in a variable inside the function. So let's write it. Even numbers to x. Then we have to put in something, unless the function is going to give errors. So let's say we want to print out even numbers from 1 to x, and x can be, let's say x is 20. Once you put in 20 here and run the function, it takes the 20, inserts it into this range, and now the range now automatically determines 1 to 20. When 20 is also exclusive, then it now prints it out. Now, sometimes we may want to provide the default value in case the user does not input a value, the caller does not specify a value. The function itself can specify a default value. It is mostly useful, especially when we want to provide an option for the user to input value while still allowing flexibility in the program. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it here so we can alter it. Now we can change the function name to default and change x to the default value we want to put. Let's now change the default value to 10. So in this scenario, you can call this function without having to put in a value, an argument. And you can call the function while putting in an argument. So let's test for it. Let's call even numbers default and then pass an argument. When we run, it takes the x that is already predefined as default argument and puts it inside the function and then executes it. So we can also call it with argument, let's say 15, and then it runs perfectly fine. Now, a function can also send back a result. It mostly allows us to store the result and use it elsewhere in the program. Let's say, for example, a function that calculates the square of a number returns the result instead of printing it. Let's say return square. Define return square. This function takes in an argument and then returns the square of that argument. To return it, we use the return keyword. So return number raised to the power 2. So we have define this function. If we are to run it, there will not be any output display, but it has returned a value which we can store and use it in our future applications. So let's run it and store it. So say we want to return the square of the number 10. Let's say 10 square. Return, we call it 10. Now it has processed the whole thing, but it returned the value of the function to the square 10 variable. And for us to see the value, we can print square 10 square variable, which is 100. So it has properly processed the function and displayed the output for you. Yeah, and this concludes the section on Python functions. The next we're going to talk about would be Python imports. Now, Python does have built-in codes like the print function and various other functions within its built-in libraries. And imports sort of allow us to make use of those built-in libraries to make our processing easy. Think of it as like borrowing a recipe from Python without having to build one from scratch, because it already exists. So these built-in models help reduce the stress for us developing our own models. So we're going to use it by we're going to import some functions, some libraries. Now the keyword for import is import. So to import libraries, we use import, let's say mathematics, because math is one of the most used library. And within this library, you have several math functions, such as permutation, combination, so many things. So we're going to run this math function. Also has square and square root. So we're going to use square root to generate. We won't use square root to find the square root of a number. This is a built-in function. So let's try to find the square root of 9 using the math function. So let's say math.sqrt, then 81. Runs fine and smooth. So if we are to print out the value, you would see it to be 9.0. So it's correct. Now, for you to learn about Python's libraries, built-in functions, and built-in class data within Python, you would definitely have to go and read the documentation, because the documentation has more libraries that you can think of within Python. So if you read the documentation, you can see that various libraries exist. So for you to use them, you have to import them, since they don't exist in the normal timeline of the codes running. Another library we're going to test will be the random library. So the library is special because it's used to generate random words by using stuff like a key from the system. So we get it by using import random. But sometimes you wouldn't want to import the whole module, the whole library. You want to just import a certain function in the library. And how we do that is by using this format. We use from the whole library, the name of the library, say random import and int. So rand int is a function inside random. and is used to generate random integers within a certain range. So this concludes the lesson on imports. Let me just run the random int so you can see the output. Random integer 100. So if we run this, it tells us that it has generated a random integer between 1 and 100, which is 39. So this concludes our video on Python loops, functions, and imports. I hope you learned a lot. In the video, we talked about so many things. We talked about Python loops. We took in the for loop and the while loop. We also talked about functions, how to create a function arguments, and how the function performs. And then lastly, we talked about Python imports. If you have any questions, please say something about them on the comment line. I would like to hear feedback from you on my teaching style. Subscribe and click the notification button. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for watching, and if you learned something new or enjoyed this video, be sure to show us support by clicking like and subscribe. Your support helps us to bring you even better content, so stay tuned for the next exciting video. You can also click the link below to see other free and paid videos on other exciting topics. If the click did not work, kindly copy the link and paste on your browser. Thank you, and see you in the next video.